Welcome to Eye on America. I'm Michelle Miller. Today we share stories of Americans making their communities stronger. Ride along with us to see a piece of transportation history restored in Washington, D.C. And in honor of the 21st anniversary of 9/11, we head to New York City for a lesson in determination. But first, we travel to Puerto Rico, 5 years after the devastation of Hurricane Maria, where the island is recovering from yet another natural disaster. David Begnaud saw firsthand how resilient residents are coming together to rebuild.
Carlos Rodriguez and his team are redefining the concept of farm to table.
We say it's expensive to be poor in Puerto Rico. And so part of our dignity list, number one, is good food. Good, fresh, delicious, healthy for them.
Dignity.
Dignity.
Rodriguez's nonprofit, the Happy Givers, employs mostly retirement-age Puerto Ricans who grow, harvest, prepare, and then deliver meals to hundreds of the most needy people here each and every week.
They're the heroes. They survived Irma, Maria, earthquakes, pandemics. Yeah. They're still smiling. They're still giving. They're the true happy givers. I now have 15 moms in this community, right? That pray for me, that take care of me, that throw blessings every time I come. I have friends. I have amazing employees that really believe in what we're doing.
Raised in the southern city of Ponce, after Hurricane Maria, Rodriguez and his family left their lives in North Carolina and returned to Puerto Rico. They bought this sod farm in Vega Baja.
You ran into the storm, so to speak, to help, and have stayed.
And we like to say this is not just a 30-second video, it's a 30-year vision. And hopefully, David, we won't be needed in 30 years.
It's called La Calle de la Fortaleza. That was the original name. Now it's La Calle de la Resistencia.
Which means?
The Street of Resistance.
Jadimar Bonilla says Rodriguez is part of a growing trend of people who are rising from the ruins of Hurricane Maria.
5 years since Maria. What's happened since?
You could tell a story of nothing has changed, the power is still out, we're still struggling with a lot of things, but the fact is that we're such a different place, you know? In the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, we became emboldened and strengthened and said, no, enough of this, we want a different Puerto Rico.
Bad Bunny may be the biggest hit in music globally. So much of his music, Jadimar, speaks to the issues on this island.
Yes, yes, you can see his soundtrack, how it chronicles the changes in Puerto Rico. Estamos Bien, all about the hurricane. Afilando Cuchillos was literally the soundtrack of the resistance movement here. It's a different kind of assertion of nationalism. So with all the problems, this is where we want to be. His most recent song, Apagón, which means blackout, it starts being all about the problems with the electric grid and, oh, another blackout and how we experience all that. And then it transforms into this plea that he says, we just want to stay here. All I want is to be able to live here.
Bonilla descends from a long line of strong women. She considers her mother and her 95-year-old grandmother among the activists who are still making a difference in Puerto Rico's future.
We want to change our country, our land, the society that we live in, and just help us do that. But let us do it. Let us define what we want Puerto Rico to be in the future.
We're in the midst of an unprecedented reconstruction. Permanent projects are happening as we speak.
In January 2021, Pedro Pierluisi was elected governor. He says it's his top priority to rebuild the critical infrastructure damaged 5 years ago.
So how much money has Puerto Rico received to help rebuild?
Well, just FEMA has disbursed over $5 billion on emergency assistance projects. This is basic repairs and individual assistance, actually economic assistance to people who suffered damages because of the hurricane.
Do you think Puerto Ricans rely less on the United States government today than ever before?
I think what we see often is that there are these numbers of, the U.S. government has approved these many millions or billions of dollars. That doesn't always translate to these communities.
Independent journalist Bianca Grollo also returned to live in her native Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria. She wanted to cover the untold stories, and her reporting was just featured in a recent documentary released by Bad Bunny.
You have communities growing their own food, collecting rainwater, providing electricity through solar panels because they don't trust that the government can get it to them, and because they've lived through instances where they've been lacking those services.
Grollo cites Casa Pueblo as one shining example of innovation with little federal funding. For example, solar panels have been installed on the roofs of 13 businesses, whose owners all agree to provide critical services like medicine, refrigeration, and cell phone charging to residents during major power outages like they're experiencing now.
So that the barber now has reliable electricity, so that the bakery now has reliable electricity, and that we have an oasis so that when we have an outage in Juntas, the people who don't have the solar panels can come here, connect their devices, and so that they're not stranded.
The Puerto Rican people will tell you it is the communities coming together that is helping them survive. And that takes us all the way back to the good deeds of Carlos Rodriguez.
Month and a half, 1 month and a half, no water.
No water.
No water.
And she's just explaining.
And sometimes, no light.
Meet Victoria Ortiz. She's a stroke survivor who lives alone in Vega Alta, struggling to make ends meet. She told us softly how grateful she was to get a helping hand from a happy giver.
I believe that the future of Puerto Rico lies in its community organizing, because when it's the people themselves that are doing it, you see a lot of successes. And even if the general picture might look a little dim, these communities are showing the path of what's possible.
Switching gears now to another community getting creative to help solve challenges, and in this case, the nationwide teacher shortage. Jonathan Vigliotti shows us how one school district is earning straight A's by offering affordable housing.
Paramecium is a type of bacteria.
Among the things that can't be taught in a classroom, how to keep teachers in the classroom.
There's been times where, we didn't have a math teacher or we didn't have a language teacher.
Just south of San Francisco, the Jefferson Union High School District found a common denominator.
What do you attribute to that turnover?
High cost of living, 100%.
Consider that a decade ago, teacher pay used to be affordable, but while salaries have gone up slightly, rents have skyrocketed. This district found a solution.
Very spacious, extremely roomy.
A 122-unit apartment complex, approved by local voters, built for teachers and staff on school property. For the average two-bedroom unit in this neighborhood,
You're going to easily pay over $3,000 a month.
biology teacher Michaela Ott's rent is nearly half that, $1,600 a month.
If I hadn't gotten the housing, it would have been really challenging for me to make ends meet.
I was absolutely blown away.
Jonathan Krupp has taught social science for 13 years.
How important is an effort like this to the teaching community?
There are no words to describe it. I think that this gives teachers hope.
While other school districts still have vacancies, at Terra Nova High School,
This year, I started fully staffed, which was huge.
Principal Megan Carey says there have always been pocketbook concerns.
We had a teacher who was delivering pizzas.
Meet Eric Willemse,
Gather around.
who says until he got a teacher's apartment, he couldn't coach cross country.
Delivering pizzas actually pays more than coaching in this district. But having this subsidized, teacher housing, oh man, it's a godsend. Yeah.
What's your message to other school districts across the country?
Just do it. Everyone will benefit from it.
Money well spent.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Money well spent.
Being able to live in a place where I feel like I can recharge, I feel a weight lifted off my shoulders. Make sense? Yep.
Coming up, we head to our nation's capital for a history lesson. This is Eye on America. Welcome back. Nancy Chin has our next story about the bygone era of Washington, D.C.'s canals that used to transport food, fuel, and other essentials. They've now been revitalized and are bringing in boatloads of tourists.
On the board, touchdown! Canal boats again!
As this vessel takes visitors on a time-honored expedition, squeezing under low bridges and through narrow walls, its 30,000 pounds are guided entirely by hand.
This boat is a flat bottom, has no keel. So it's It just maneuvers like a living room couch.
Franklin Santa Croce captains today's trip on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal in Washington, D.C.
So is it okay that we're bumping into things?
Yes, it's a canal boat. It's designed to bump into things.
Santa Croce moves the boat much the same way his predecessors did 2 centuries ago, when this passage revolutionized trade.
You guys, you're so far down.
The canal locks boats between heavy gates before deckhands change the water level, floating the boat from one lock to the next and allowing barges to move through elevations.
All right, let's go.
As it passes the historic Georgetown neighborhood, the boat retraces a chapter of American history defined by both the promise of westward expansion and gritty perseverance. This waterway helped modernize life for generations in the mid-Atlantic by providing a path for essential goods like coal. This spring, a tour recreating the first mile returned after 11 years as part of a massive restoration.
Were you nervous when you took this first ride out?
Oh, absolutely. Terrifying. It's a lot of boat. I mean, it's 80 feet long and 13 feet wide, and that pass we're going to be going through is probably about 16 feet wide.
Powered by electric motors rather than the mules that traditionally guided a boat, it tops out at a brisk 2 miles per hour. But history takes its time.
5 houses down is where George Washington negotiated the purchase of the land for the city of the District of Columbia.
George Washington.
1791.
This was a stable back during the heyday of the canal.
Rex Carnegie heads education outreach for the Georgetown Heritage Foundation, which helped fund the boat's return.
Why was it so important to bring a canal boat back to the C&O Canal here?
It's a good way to connect folks to the history, whether that's recent history here in Georgetown or whether that's the 200-year history of the canal.
This is crazy.
The tours have been deemed an instant hit.
Nowadays, everything's so mechanical, everything's automated. So seeing people actually get out and use that muscle power, that is a connection to our ancestors here.
The lock system in and of itself is fascinating.
That's one of the reasons why we always gather a crowd. I mean, people are always excited to see this boat either go up or come down that line.
A vision from George Washington himself. Long before highways, the founding father imagined waterways, linking the East Coast to the Great Lakes and Ohio River. The C&O Canal covers nearly 185 miles of that. Mile 0 marks the start, planted in front of a complex with its own storied stamp on American history, the Water Gate. The canal then weaves along dramatic waterfalls and through mountain tunnels on its way to Cumberland, Maryland, its destination nestled in the Allegheny Mountains. The path opened for trade in 1850. Running alongside the Potomac River.
Let's go.
Where we jumped on the water with Christiana Hansen from the C&O Canal National Historical Park.
What did this area look like 200 years ago?
So the C&O Canal, it was a highway. You would have had bumper-to-bumper boats the same way you would have had bumper-to-bumper cars today going into DC. It was a very busy place.
Hansen took us to park headquarters in Williamsport, Maryland, the canal's halfway point.
This is one of the original buildings along the C&O Canal.
It is, yes. It's about 200 years old. Canal boats would come up in the basin here and unload coal. We would then load the coal into the trains and they would head off to go and power the area.
When canal construction started, the project was an ambitious one and one of the country's first large-scale civil engineering projects. Despite the promise of its name, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal never made it to the Ohio River Valley, instead ending in Cumberland, Maryland after running out of funds. Operators still found plenty of coal there, and it became an early supply chain.
Heyday of the canal is the 1870s. This is right after we've had a civil war, so our country is rebuilding in really new and different ways. The canal is really busy, trade is expanding.
The peak of its heyday lasted about a decade during the 1870s, but the canal operated for nearly 100 years. Communities grew on and along the water as laborers, including families, worked the canal through all hours and seasons.
Some of my favorite pictures are kids with ropes around them that you go, why is that kid leashed? Yeah. Oh, it's so they don't fall in.
What a childhood.
Right? But you also would lead mules. So the big engines on the canal boat were mules and kids helped lead them.
While canal trade thrived, the railroad remained a fierce source of competition, eventually overtaking it. And after several catastrophic floods, the canal closed in 1924.
Is this in some ways a failure?
I think it's a grand experiment. So the canal, it's a struggle to keep it running, and it was even back in the day. You're working against nature, and that's what they were struggling with in the 1800s as well. Trains were getting better and better, faster and faster.
Today, it's one of the most visited national parks, surpassing even Yellowstone, as people continue to honor a tradition of exploring and dreaming of more.
This canal, the railroad, the planes that are flying overhead, all of these things connect us to that tradition. And the thing that we can hope for is that things will become easier and more efficient.
Which is also ironic considering how much we want to preserve these chapters of American history so we can learn from that history.
Absolutely. That is a story of the people, not just the dates and not just the famous folks, but real everyday people. How does that connect to where we are and where we're going?
After the break, we introduce you to a Minneapolis entrepreneur bringing change to his hometown. This is Eye on America. One of the country's biggest retailers, Target, is headquartered in Minneapolis. Jamie Yukas sat down with Target's CEO and a local entrepreneur who formed a partnership to build business and community.
In North Minneapolis, Houston White's old barber shop has evolved into a place to grab coffee or buy clothes. But at its core, it's a place for the community to come together.
Black professionals specifically need a sense of connection and tribe and place. And there's nothing realer in the Black community than the barbershop. It's that place that you just feel like you can breathe and be yourself.
So in early 2020, when Brian Cornell, CEO of Minneapolis-based Target, heard a group of Black employees wanted him to hear their thoughts,
I said, make it happen. Let's pick a spot.
The spot was White's shop. And it was there that the two men, both with a determination to help other dreamers, became friends.
And he had this vision to bring energy and vitality to this area. And it wasn't about him, it was what he could do for Minneapolis and for other entrepreneurs.
3 months after White and Cornell met, a Minneapolis police officer murdered George Floyd.
I remember gathering my Black officers right after George Floyd's murder. Those team members had tears in their eyes, and they were telling me how it affected them, their families.
Since then, Target has promised to invest $2 billion in Black-owned businesses.
It's preppy and it's cool.
One of those businesses?
You know, I'm a preppy street kid.
A new fashion line designed by a hometown barber with a passion for clothes.
I kind of want you to close your eyes.
We were there when Target's chief merchandising officer, Jill Sando, showed Houston his display for the first time at a Target that was rebuilt after being ransacked by looters in 2020.
The city has been through so much the last couple of years. Are you hoping that this somewhat changes the story of what people think of Minneapolis?
I think it will. Like, we are in the Lake Street store. This is hope. This is joy. This is what's possible. And this is how we're going to bring this community and Minneapolis forward.
If this is the hustler of the future.
Yes.
We close our show from the 9/11 Memorial and Museum here in New York City, where every photo tells a tragic yet inspiring story. Here's Adriana Diaz.
Where the towers once stood, there's a constant flow of sorrow. The names of those lost here line the water's edge, while just below ground, inside the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, you can look into their eyes.
I mean, everybody's face has a story behind it. This is Betty Ong, who made the famous call to the ground reporting the hijacking underway.
Jan Seidler Ramirez is the museum's chief curator. She's overseen the massive collection of these images supplied by loved ones who volunteered photos.
It sets up immediately the diversity of the victims, the magnitude. When people are in the gallery, they will go to the wall and they will find faces that intrigued them.
What intrigued Grant Yera, who works in visitor services helping guests, was this missing photo for Albert Ogletree, one of 2 images unaccounted for.
He's a great guy.
He then made a promise to his friend in security.
I pointed at the leaf and I said to Linda, Linda, I'm going to get the photo on the wall.
But little was known about Ogletree, except that he worked in a cafeteria in the North Tower. His wife died after the attacks, and he had no known descendants. Then, on his own time, Yera found an online tribute from a stepdaughter. He tracked her down on Facebook.
She did write back to me. However, she did not have any photos because he did not like having his photo taken.
He was camera shy.
He was.
People associated with Forte Foods, who were food handlers, they didn't have the backing of an employer like the New York City Police Department that had all the different ways people are photographed as part of a community or as part of their employment.
So the trail had run dry, or did it?
So I turned to Ancestry.com and I was able to find an address for him living in Romulus, Michigan. I felt that maybe if I could find where he went to high school, that maybe they would have a photo of him.
This was really a shot in the dark.
Yes, it was.
He emailed the high school in Romulus outside Detroit. They didn't have older yearbooks, but city councilwoman and former teacher Kathy Abdo, who the school called for help, knew where to find them: the local historical museum.
I had an idea of what decade he was in Romulus. So I went over and I went through all of the yearbooks in the 60s. So I had to go through page by page. And that's where I found Albert Ogletree.
The image is pixelated, but the camera-shy Ogletree is finally found. His only known photo, taken around 15 years old.
This is someone that used to go to my high school. And he's not going to be forgotten now.
I'd say I probably jumped a foot.
You jumped a foot in the air?
Yeah, it was a true accomplishment for Albert, for his memory.
To physically hold it and see this sort of tender, sweet young face that, you know, the adult life had not etched yet. The really wonderful moment was when the stepdaughter looked at the portrait and she said, "Oh my gosh, he hasn't changed at all."
We spoke to Albert's stepdaughter, and she said, "He taught me how to ride a bike. He helped teach me how to tie my shoes." She didn't want to appear on camera, but I can only imagine that this is going to provide her with some kind of closure.
Absolutely.
The wide eyes and slight smile of a young Albert Ogletree now appear above his name. The details of his life are still unclear, but his face is in focus.
When Albert's photo went up, I'm like, Linda, it's here.
I was like, wonderful, wonderful.
A promise made to a man from the past he never knew, that he would never be forgotten.
For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news 24/7, stream us right here on CBS News. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for watching Eye on America.
Sponsored by United Healthcare Medicare Plans. Get Medicare with more.